Buy a loaf of bread, you make one sandwich, you twist the bag shut, maybe even clip it like a responsible adult, put it on the counter, and you feel good about yourself. 2 days later, you come back for sandwich number two, and your bread looks like it's auditioning for a nature documentary. There are fuzzy green patches, there might be some black spots, and there's something white and cottony that honestly looks like it's breathing. You're standing there in your kitchen thinking, I literally just bought this. So what happened? Why does bread mold so unbelievably fast? Because here's the thing most people get wrong. They think bread goes bad, like it's a character flaw, like the bread just gave up on life. But that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is way more interesting and honestly a little horrifying. Bread doesn't go bad, bread gets colonized. To understand why, you need to think about bread the way mold thinks about bread, which is absolute paradise. Let's start with something that might ruin your day. Mold spores are already in your kitchen right now, floating around in the air like microscopic confetti that nobody invited. They're on your countertops, on your hands, and your lungs probably. They are just everywhere all the time. Now, mold spores are incredibly tiny. You can't see them and you can't feel them landing, but they are constantly drifting around looking for somewhere to set up shop. Most of the time, they land on surfaces that are too dry or too hot or too cold, and nothing happens. Spore just sits there like a sad little seed in a parking lot. But then every once in a while a spore lands on something perfect, something warm, something moist, something full of nutrients, something like bread. And when that happens, the spore basically wins the lottery. See, mold isn't complicated. It needs water, food, oxygen, a surface that isn't too acidic, and a temperature that doesn't kill it. Bread provides literally all five of those things, so let's go through them one by one, because this is where it gets kind of unfair for the bread, starting with water. Bread feels dry, right? Like you wouldn't pick up a slice and think, wow, this is moist. But food scientists have this concept called water activity, which measures how much of the water in a food is actually available for microbes to use, and bread scores high. We're talking 0.94 to 0.97 on a scale where 1.0 is pure water. That is more than enough for mold to grow. For comparison, a dry cracker is way down the scale, which is why crackers can sit in your pantry for months looking exactly the same while bread starts growing a beard in 4 days. Next up is food. Bread is packed with starches and sugars. Now, mold doesn't eat bread the way you do. Doesn't sit down with some butter and enjoy a nice slice. Instead, it secretes enzymes that break down the starches and absorb the nutrients. Basically, mold is digesting your bread externally, like a tiny fuzzy chemistry lab, and bread is full of exactly the kind of energy-rich compounds that mold thrives on. Then there's oxygen, and unless you're vacuum sealing your bread, and let's be honest, you are not, there's plenty of oxygen available. Bread sits on your counter, loosely wrapped, breathing in the same air you do, and mold appreciates that. Then there's pH, which is the acidity factor. Very acidic foods can make life hard for mold. Think pickled stuff, citrus, vinegar-based things. Mold doesn't love that environment. But bread has a pH around 6, which is basically neutral. It's the beige wall of the pH world. It's not fighting back at all. Bread has zero defensive personality. And finally, temperature. Most mold likes it warm, but mold is not fragile. Room temperature is ideal, and your kitchen counter in the middle of summer is basically a mold spa. But even in cooler conditions, mold doesn't just quit. It slows down, sure, but it keeps going. But when you stack all of that up, bread isn't just a food that can go bad. It's one of the single best environments on the planet for mold to grow. If mold had a real estate agent, bread would be the listing that says must see, won't last. And it wouldn't last because the mold would eat it. Now here's a detail that makes this even more tragic. When bread comes out of the oven, it's basically sterile. The heat from baking kills off any mold spores that were in the dough. Your bread is born clean. Then it cools down, it gets sliced, it gets put in a bag, it gets touched by your hands, it sits on a counter. Someone opens the bag, grabs a slice, closes the bag, opens it again, grabs another slice, and every single one of those steps is an opportunity for airborne spores to land on the bread and start setting up camp. Bread doesn't create mold, the world delivers mold to the bread. It's like building a beautiful sandcastle and being surprised when seagulls show up. The seagulls were always coming, you just built something they're interested in. Speaking of things that help mold out, you know the phrase, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, mold agrees. When bread is sliced, you're creating more surface area. Every cut face is a new landing strip for spores. A whole unsliced loaf has one outer crust protecting the soft inside, but once you start slicing, you're rolling out the welcome mat. Food science studies have found that sliced bread is more prone to mold growth for exactly this reason. More surfaces, more contamination points, more access to all that delicious moist interior. So sliced bread is more convenient for you, but it's also more convenient for mold, which is honestly a pretty messed up form of cooperation. Now a lot of people think refrigeration solves this problem, and it doesn't. Cold slows mold down, absolutely, but mold is not some fragile little creature that dies the second things get chilly. Plenty of molds can grow at refrigerator temperatures, they just grow slower. Your bread in the fridge is still getting colonized, it's just happening in slow motion. Think of it this way, putting bread in the fridge is like putting a speed bump in front of a very determined driver. It helps a little, but the driver is still coming. Freezing, on the other hand, actually works. Freezing basically hits pause on mold growth, which is why frozen bread can last months while counter bread starts looking haunted within a week. So if you want bread to last, freezing is the move, refrigerating is the compromise, and leaving it on the counter in a humid kitchen is basically an act of surrender. Now here's where commercial bread and homemade bread split into two very different stories. Commercial bread, the kind you grab off the shelf at the grocery store, often contains preservatives specifically designed to slow mold growth. One of the most common is calcium propionate, and that's the ingredient doing the heavy lifting to keep your store-bought sandwich bread looking acceptable for a week or more. It's standard in the baking industry, and it does a solid job extending shelf life. Homemade bread, though, yeah, it doesn't have that. It's got flour, water, yeast, salt, maybe some butter, and absolutely zero anti-mold defense systems. It's bread in its most natural, unprotected state. That's why your homemade sourdough can start looking fuzzy within a few days while the store-bought loaf is still holding strong. Some studies note that commercial bread can start showing mold around 3 to 4 days under certain conditions, and homemade bread can go even faster without preservatives. But when your homemade bread molds quickly, that's not a sign you made bad bread. In a weird way, it's almost a flex. It means your bread is so natural that even fungi can't resist it. Congratulations, you've made artisan mold food. Mold doesn't just care about the moisture inside the bread, it also cares about the moisture around the bread. If your kitchen is humid, that helps mold. If your bread is trapped in a bag where moisture is condensing on the inside, that helps mold. Bread packaging is actually a weird balancing act because it keeps bread from drying out too fast, but that trapped humidity also creates a cozy little greenhouse for fungi. And this is one of those situations where you genuinely can't win. Unwrap the bread and it dries out. Leave it wrapped and the moisture builds up. Mold is basically exploiting a packaging design flaw, which honestly is kind of impressive for an organism with no brain. Okay, now here's the part that actually matters for your health. You see a fuzzy spot on your bread and your instinct is to tear off the moldy piece and eat the rest. We've all done it. We've all stood in the kitchen performing surgery on a slice of bread like it's a totally normal thing to do. But here's the problem. In soft, porous foods like bread, mold doesn't just sit on the surface. It sends root-like threads called hyphae deep into the bread, so by the time you see the fuzzy patch on top, the mold has probably already spread way deeper than you think. The visible part is just the tip of the iceberg. That's why food safety guidelines say to throw out moldy bread entirely, not just cut off the bad part. Some molds can also produce harmful substances called mycotoxins, and those aren't something you want to mess around with. Now with something dense like hard cheese, the rules are a bit different because mold can't penetrate as deeply. You can cut off the mold with a margin, and the rest is usually fine. But bread is soft and porous, it's basically a sponge with a dream, and once mold is visible, the contamination likely goes further than what you can see. So please, for the love of your digestive system, stop performing bread surgery. Just throw it out. Now here's a common mystery that drives people crazy. You buy 2 loaves of bread at the same time, one molds in 3 days, the other looks fine for a week. What's going on? It's not random. Mold growth depends on a whole bunch of factors all stacking up at once. One loaf might have more preservatives, one might have been stored in a slightly warmer spot, one might have picked up more spores during handling, one might have had more moisture trapped in the bag, one might have been opened and closed more often. It's not one single thing that determines when bread molds, it's the combination, and different loaves can have wildly different combinations even if they look identical sitting next to each other on the shelf. So if you made it this far, you probably want to know, okay, what do I actually do? And the science is pretty straightforward even if the execution requires more discipline than most of us have. Keep bread in a cool, dry place. Avoid leaving it in warm, humid environments. Don't handle it more than you need to because every touch is a potential spore delivery system, and if you know you're not going to finish a loaf in a few days, freeze what you won't use soon. Freezing is genuinely the best long-term storage option. Refrigeration helps somewhat, but it's not a guarantee, and bread stored in the fridge can also go stale faster because of how the starches behave at cold temperatures, so you're trading one problem for a different, slightly less disgusting problem. Commercial bakeries use preservatives because bread's natural properties make it such a ridiculously easy target. Without chemical intervention, bread is basically defenseless, a delicious, carb-filled sitting duck. But why does bread mold so fast? Because bread isn't just food that happens to go bad. It's a near-perfect growth medium that happens to be food. It's soft, it's moist, it's nutrient-rich, it's only mildly acidic, and it sits at room temperature exposed to oxygen and air that's full of invisible spores. And every time you open that bag, you're essentially opening the gates. The spores land, they find moisture, they find food, they find a comfortable pH, they find a temperature they can work with, and they germinate, grow hyphae, spread through the bread, and eventually produce the fuzzy colonies that make you question every life choice you made this week. That fuzzy green spot on your sandwich isn't random. It's the natural, predictable, scientifically inevitable result of putting one of mold's favorite materials in one of mold's favorite environments, and then being surprised when mold shows up. Bread molds fast because bread is, from mold's perspective, the greatest thing since bread. And now you know.